How do you plan for labor capacity in your building automation business? Hi, my name is Phil Zito. I'm the founder and CEO of Building Automation Monthly, where we provide online training to help businesses increase the profitability and the effectiveness of their BAS employees. So one of the questions I often get is, how do you plan for labor in your building automation business? Like, how do you know when you have enough staff, when you have too few staff, and how can you project that forward far enough that you're able to say, okay, I see a gap coming up. I can make a decision whether it makes sense to employ someone or use some form of temporary labor or to develop relationships with outsourced labor. Well, the trick to all of this is something called forecasting. And unfortunately, you don't hear enough folks talk about the concept of forecasting. And what often happens is the folks that are responsible for forecasting, the project managers, the operational managers, they often tend to be technicians that are moved up because of their technical expertise, and they have to figure it out as they go. So what I'm going to do in this video is give you 3 quick tips that you can apply in your building automation business that will help with forecasting and help with labor planning. So the assumption I'm going to make here in this video is that we're talking about construction work. It's a little different for service work because the sales cycle on service work is so much shorter, and by its nature, a lot of service work is reactionary based on service calls from a customer. So we'll talk about that in a future video. But when it comes to construction work, you have the fortune of knowing that a construction project typically lasts a certain period of time. You also often can tell based on the type of project what the point of completion points, or basically when you can bill out. That's the main purpose of point of completion, to say how far along you are on a project so you can bill out. So you're able to tell where those are. So by knowing that information, then you're able to, with your experience of building automation projects, say these tasks most likely have to be executed at this time and require these materials, this labor, and the subcontractors. So you're able to forecast that labor, subcontractor, and material costs out across the life cycle of the project. Now, when you do that, especially if you use this next tip I'm going to tell you about, you're able to really start to see where you need labor and when you're going to need it. Next thing I recommend is using labor cost codes. So not enough folks do this as well, which is where you say, okay, we've got design labor, we've got programming labor, we've got technician labor. And I get a lot of pushback when I talk about this. Folks will say, well, how can we go and accurately calculate every hour that we're spending on certain tasks? And here's my answer to that. It's better that you be 10% off on what labor you're spending tasks on than be just not tracking it at all. A better idea is to say, okay, hey, I'm 10% off maybe on my programming hours, but at least I'm pretty sure that I know what programming hours I'm using on this project and what technician hours I'm using. By having this information both forecasted as well as having it at the end of the project when you do your final reestimate to see what your actual costs were, you're going to be able to know not only what labor you need, but also what labor you typically use, which is really important when we're talking about capacity planning. The third thing I'm going to talk about is just that, capacity planning. So it's one thing to look at your forecast and say, okay, I'm seeing that we need this many hours of technician time, this many hours of designer time, and saying, okay, I know I need this kind of capacity. What doesn't often come into that equation is efficiency of execution. So if you see that your technicians and they're logging their hours as install tech or startup tech, whatever, and you see that they are consistently not hitting their targets, then that points to one of two things. You're either overutilizing your techs and they're bouncing between job to job and they're not able to execute efficiently, or they're undertrained, so they're not able to be fully utilized. It's one of those two. And this is something that needs to be factored into capacity planning to make sure that you're paying attention not only to the forecast, but also the actual execution. So to summarize, tip number 1 is to make sure you actually do forecasts. Tip number 2 is to make sure you use labor codes. And tip number 3 is to look at the actual executed labor at the end of the project and make sure you utilize that for capacity planning. So there you have it. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to getting your comments in the comment section below this video. And if you have personnel that you are looking to develop and you want to know where they're at and then create a customized training plan for them, definitely reach out to us. That's what we do, and we've done it for over 4,600 students, and I look forward to working with you as well. Thanks a ton. Take care.